Hey everyone, this is Ramanuj and welcome to the episode 7 of our Spring Boot and Microservices tutorial series. Well, in our last episode, we have connected our Spring Boot application to a MySQL database. We were able to do certain operations like we are able to fetch the data from the database, we were able to store the data to the database, and so on. In this video, we would understand what are the things going on behind the scene. What is Spring Data JPA, what is Hibernate, what is JPA, how they are related to each other, and many more things. Let's get started. So when we look at our code, what exactly we have done? We had a class which had our model class, which is also known as the entity class, wherein we have written certain annotations. And most importantly, when you look at the repository layer, we have just created one interface which extends a Spring Data JPA provided interface called JPA repository. That's what we have done. We haven't done anything else, and we have written a couple of properties to connect to the database. That's all, and things are working. Let's try to understand what is actually happening behind the scene. So in order to understand this, first you need to understand there are a lot of things which are abstracted from you. So first of all, we know if you are being a Java developer, you probably knowing JDBC or Java Database Connectivity, wherein we write the low-level SQL queries, and JDBC used to execute those queries and fetch the data from the database or store the data to the database. When it comes to JPA, JPA stands for Java Persistence API. Well, let's try to understand this new term called Hibernate. Okay, so what is that Hibernate? And if I show you something in this, you'd be able to see that Hibernate is written everywhere. Whenever there is a command getting executed, you can see Hibernate is coming again and again. So what is that Hibernate, and what is the role of Hibernate? What exactly it is doing? Let's try to understand. So Hibernate is actually an ORM tool, right? So let's try to understand ORM. Okay, so what is ORM? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. Okay, Object Relational Mapping. Object Relational Mapping. So what do you mean by this object relational mapping? Well, in order to understand this, let's try to understand a few things. First thing, what we are doing, we have in our right hand side, we have a Java application. This is our Java application. Okay. And in our left hand side, we have a database, right? So here we have a database. Now our Java code wants to talk to the database. Now you need to understand one thing. Java is what? What kind of language Java is? It is object oriented. So keep that thing in mind, oriented. And what is the database type? It is relational. So what is the difference here? Now you think of, when you are thinking of Java, in our case, when we are thinking of a product, okay. So you have a product. How do you represent this product? How exactly I'm going to represent a product? Well, a product is a class in Java. However, in case of your database, in case of your relational database or MySQL, what is a product? Is actually a table. So here, if we think of product, it is actually a table. Now, when you think of one particular product, when you are creating a product in Java, what is that one product? It's an object of product class. So you are writing product P1 equal new product. This is how we create an object, and we would pass some properties, ID, name, and so on, right? So this is how we create an object of a product class. So one product in Java means an object of product class. However, in a database, if I say that, how do you refer to one product in a database? It is actually a row or a record in the product table. So in the database, it is actually a row or a record. In database, it is actually row or a record. So that is what you need to understand. So there is, with the help of object relational mapping, we are establishing a mapping between this product class and the product table, so that whenever I create an object of a product class, it should create a corresponding object or a corresponding record in the product table. So this is how things has to be mapped. Okay, this is how things has to be mapped. And this is why we are using object relational mapping. Okay, so similarly, when we fetch the data from the database, let's suppose I'm fetching the data from the database. So from the database, we don't get objects. Whatever we get from the database is rows and columns. Okay, so there is a name for this which is known as result set. So we get rows and columns, but we want to convert it to or map it to Java objects. This is what your object relational mapping or an ORM tool does. Okay, this is something that ORM tool is doing. So I am being a Java developer, I don't need to know the low level SQL stuff. I don't need to write the low level SQL stuff. Rather, I would focus on my Java code and I would use an ORM tool to do all those stuff for me. At the end, you remember database doesn't know Java and Java doesn't know database. So this ORM tool here, which is Hibernate, is doing all this mapping, right? So all the mapping, right? So generating the queries, mapping the table data to Java object, everything Hibernate is doing. Now let's come to this point. Then what is the role of JPA? Well, Hibernate is not the only ORM implementation. There are other implementation as well. Hibernate definitely is the most popular one, and Spring by default uses Hibernate, but we do have other implementation as well. For example, we have OpenJPA, we have Eclipse Link, and so on. So JPA creates a loose coupling. What do you mean by that? So JPA basically is a specification. So we directly don't use Hibernate. We directly don't write code for Hibernate. We write things for JPA. And in future, we can replace Hibernate with any other implementation without making any coding changes. And that is what JPA facilitates. So JPA is a specification and Hibernate is an implementation of that specification. So you can easily think of it like JPA has the interfaces and Hibernate has the classes that implement those interfaces. You can think of it in that way. Okay. And what is Spring Data JPA? Well, Spring Data JPA is a Spring version or Spring implementation of the JPA, which makes it even simple and easier. Even though you are using Hibernate, it does a lot of work for you, no doubt, but still there are few things, there are configurations, there are a few code that you need to write. Spring Data JPA reduces everything, right? So if you look at the code right now, if you look at your product repository, now you see absolutely zero code. You didn't write even a single line of code here. And Spring Data JPA is actually creating a proxy implementation for you, right? So for this interface, a proxy implementation will get created. If you want to see right the proxy implementation, yes, you can see that. Although it is not recommended, but for test purpose, we can do this. Let's suppose I want to show you. So I can create an init method, public void init. Okay. And in this init method, I would print product repository dot get class dot, if you want to get the class name, so get name, right? So you can get the name and you can print it out. So let's use an annotation post construct so that this should become an init method. So with these changes, if I relaunch this application, you would be actually able to see the name of this. Okay, so let's see the name of this class and look at this. This is the name, right? So JDK proxy to dot something, right? So you can see that Spring has created this class. Do I need to explode this class? Well, absolutely, there is no need. Just for understanding that it has created a proxy implementation. That's how Spring works. And you know, if you go to your product repository, now writing at repository on top of it, it's absolutely optional because this is an interface first of all, and Spring is creating the implementation. When Spring creates the implementation, Spring will automatically put that implementation object or implementation bin within the Spring context, or what we say IOC container, right? So that writing this repository annotation on top of this interface, it's not needed. You can write it, you can remove it, that is not mandatory. Okay, so that is what is happening behind the scene. That is what is happening behind the scene. You can actually customize a lot of other things as well, right? So if you want to customize, for example, you have an application YAML and you see we have written the bare minimal stuff here. Bare minimal stuff means I've just mentioned the URL of the database, username and password, and generate DDL and show SQL. That's all. You can add additional properties here. For example, you want to mention the driver class name. You can do that, driver class name, and you can write this MySQL JDBC driver if you want. This is absolutely optional because Spring Data JPA is very smart and it can understand what is your driver, what driver you are using from your class path as well as from the URL been provided, right? So this is optional. And similarly, we can add or few more data like with respect to JPA, we do have some properties and we can add Hibernate dialect. So what is the role of this dialect? Well, you might, right? Dialect means the SQL grammar. The SQL isn't same for different databases. Think of it, right? So if you are using MySQL, the date format is different as compared to Oracle or Postgres. Similarly, if the data types are also sometimes different. Functions, if you are using different functions, date functions or any other functions, they are also different. So you don't need to, in future, if you are switching from MySQL to other database, you can mention that, okay, I want that particular database dialect or that particular database grammar. You don't need to modify your code at all because you didn't write any of the database specific code. So that is also a flexibility when you are using ORM. Okay, this is pretty much optional. You don't need to mention because again, your Spring Data JPA is very smart. It will understand, but you can mention it as well. Similarly, there are other properties like format. There is one property called format SQL. So if you write format SQL true, what will happen? It will format the SQL that is been generated, right? So it will show it in a very nice way. Other things that you want, let's suppose you have written generate DDL2. That is fine, but I have another way of writing it as well. JPA Hibernate DDL auto update. Now, if I do this, what is the meaning of this? So I have flexibility now. I want every time the table should get created. So I can write create. So if I write create and if I relaunch my application, you would be able to see that a fresh table will get created. The previous table will get deleted. You see, right? Create table. You can see that a fresh table got created, previous table got removed, and a fresh table will get created. Is it a great idea to keep create? No, because you would lose your data every time you run. So that's not a great idea. You can use update. Okay. So these are the customization we can do on our application. And that's pretty much everything. So I hope you got an idea what ORM is, what Hibernate is doing, what is JPA, what is Spring Data JPA, and what is happening behind the scene. I hope you got an idea. And that's all for this episode. We'll see you in the next episode wherein we are going to see how exactly we can create custom queries in Spring Data JPA. See you soon. Bye.